Well, it's evening. I must confess that I'm feeling tired. I've done quite a bit today, and yeah, I'm not quite collapsed, but I'm certainly relaxed, sat back in the chair. And before I go to bed, I thought I'd pick up the Bible and have a read. And more than a few of my friends tell me that I should read the Epistle of Paul the Apostle to the Romans. Many of them say that I should go to chapter 1 and find verse 16, and I should read and read out loud. For I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God unto salvation to every one that believeth, to the Jew first and also to the Greek. I read that gladly. But being me, I'm a terrible reader. I sort of flick backwards and forwards. And this is a letter written by Paul the Apostle. And if we flick slightly back in the Bible, we come to the Acts of the Apostles. Now, men are all the same. They're not, but we all have similarities. And reading about Paul was very famously shipwrecked in Malta. Last year I went for a holiday in Malta. In 1975 I was in Malta. But there was something I didn't know about Paul, and I'm sure some of you will say, "Crikey, didn't you know that?" No, I didn't until I read this. If we look at Acts chapter 28, when they were escaped, then they knew that the island was called Melita. The barbarous people showed no little kindness, for they kindled a fire and received us every one because of the present rain and because of the cold. And when Paul had gathered a bundle of sticks and laid them on the fire, there came a viper out of the heat and fastened on his hand. When the barbarians saw the venomous beast hang on his hand, they said among themselves, "No doubt this man is a murderer. He's escaped the sea, yet vengeance suffereth not to live." But Paul shook off the beast into the fire and felt no harm. Howbeit they looked when he should have swollen or fallen down dead suddenly. But after they had looked a great while and saw no harm come to him, they changed their minds and said that he was a god. Now that struck a chord with me, because if I'm going to say that I've got similarities with Paul, it's a terrible, terrible boast. Well, I guess I've got the same number of arms and the same number of legs. I've been to Malta. Paul went to Malta. But there's something that we have in common. I was bitten by a viper in, was it 1989, 1990? And there the similarity ends. We're told that Paul felt no harm. Well, I can tell you that Paul was a lucky chap, because when I got bitten, I felt harm. Didn't feel too bad to start with. I drove myself to hospital. The nursing sister, said, "You, get your clothes off, get into that bed." I said, "Oh, don't be daft, it's only a snake bite." Well, she insisted, and I got into bed. And along came this little doctor. He stuck a cannula in my other arm. I said, "What are you doing that for?" He said, "For the shock." I said, "Well, I won't need that." Well, my arm began to swell. That's my left hand. It was just in that part of my finger that this viper bit me. And if you look, my knuckles stick out. Well, about 2 hours after the viper had bitten me, I didn't have knuckles that stuck out. Where my knuckles were dimples. My hand swelled up to 2-3 times that size. My left arm swelled up right the way up to the shoulder. It was numb. I didn't get feeling back in this finger for 2.5 years because of the nerve damage that is caused by the venom of a viper. The doctor listened to my heart. He considered that I was a fairly fit man. I guess I was in those days. The job I did in those days, I needed to be fit. And I wasn't that bothered about the whole thing until the doctor said to me, "You probably will be all right." The all right word I liked. It was the probably that bothered me somewhat. Well, they stuck me in a wheelchair and they said, "We're going to take you up to the hospital now." And that was when I was ill. The polite way of putting it is to say that I was firing on both ends. The following day, I just lost completely. The day after that, I found myself on a ward in a bed next to a chap, quite a nice chap. And while I was laying there, this incredibly pretty nurse walked past. And I looked at this chap and he looked at me, and I said something I shouldn't have said. I hadn't read the letters of St. Paul in those days, so maybe I lusted after her. And the chap in the next bed said, "You don't remember her, do you?" And I said, "Should I?" And he said, "That's the nurse that looked after you all day yesterday." And I really didn't remember. Well, I was pretty rough for several days. I think the worst I felt was when the doctor told me that I was over the worst. That was when I felt well enough that I just wanted to die. My whole body had reacted to the snake's poison. So when I read about Paul going to Malta, I've been to Malta, Paul being bitten by a snake, I've been bitten by a snake, and Paul suffering no ill effects. At the time that the doctor told me that I was going to live, I'd have traded the way that I felt then for going to Rome and being beheaded. No wonder the people of Malta thought that Paul was a bit special. Anyway, that's my evening thoughts. My next evening thoughts are before bed ablutions and then bed, I think.